My world completely collapsed when I saw who was sitting next to my son in that car and overheard the conversation they were having about me. My name is Lydia. I'm 62 years old, and I never could have imagined I would uncover the most cruel and heartless plan devised by my own family. It all began that afternoon when I decided to surprise Javier, my only son. I had made his favorite dessert and wanted to take it to his office to brighten his day. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw his silver sedan parked in a corner spot. I had a mischievous idea that made me smile like a little girl. I would hide in the back seat to surprise him when he returned. I slipped silently into the car, which was fortunately unlocked, and crouched behind the front seats. My heart pounded with excitement, thinking of the look on his face when I appeared with the chocolate cake he had loved since he was a boy. I waited there, holding my breath, listening to every sound in the parking lot. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps approaching. The car doors opened, and Javier got in the driver's seat, but then another person took the passenger seat. It was a woman. At first, I thought she might be a coworker until I heard her voice and immediately recognized it as Raquel, his wife. My first reaction was one of tenderness. How sweet that they had decided to leave work together. But my smile faded as they began to talk. The first words that came out of Raquel's mouth were like daggers to my heart. "Are you absolutely sure no one will suspect anything when it happens?" she asked in a cold voice I had never heard before. "Raquel, we've talked about this 1,000 times. The plan is perfect. Mom will have a very natural, very believable accident. No one is going to question it when a woman her age slips on the stairs in her old house." Javier replied in a tone that chilled me to the bone. The air seemed to escape from my lungs. I couldn't be hearing what I thought I was hearing. My son, my only son, the boy I had raised alone after his father died when he was just 8 years old, was planning to kill me. And after the funeral, when everything calms down, we can sell that old house and move into the subdivision we've always wanted. With the $200,000 that property is worth, plus the savings she has put away, we can live like we've always dreamed, Raquel continued with a perverse excitement in her voice. My mind went numb. That house she called old was the place where I had sacrificed everything to give Javier the best life possible. Every room held memories of sleepless nights when he was sick, of birthdays celebrated with little money but lots of love, of afternoons doing homework together at the kitchen table. "Alvin and Patricia are on board, right?" Javier asked. And hearing those names, my heart broke even more. Alvin was my older brother, and Patricia, his wife, were also involved in this diabolical conspiracy. "Of course they are. Your uncle is desperate for the money ever since he lost his job. And Patricia won't stop reminding me that your mother has always been very stingy with them. She says it's time for the family to get what they deserve," Raquel replied with contempt. Stingy. That word echoed in my mind like a painful echo. I had worked cleaning houses since I was 18 to support my son. I had even sold my wedding jewelry to pay for his college tuition. I never bought myself a new dress, so he could have everything he needed. The life insurance is going to help, too. That's another $100,000 we'll get with no problems, Javier added. And in that moment, I knew there was nothing left of the sweet boy I had raised. My tears began to fall silently as I remained crouched, praying they wouldn't discover me. My body trembled, not only with fear, but with a sadness so profound I felt like I was going to break in two. The conversation continued for several more minutes, detailing every aspect of my planned death. They had thought of everything. The exact moment, how to make it look accidental, even how they would act at the funeral to appear heartbroken. When they finally got out of the car and walked away as if nothing had happened, I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to move. I emerged from that car, a completely different woman from the one who had entered. The loving, trusting mother had died in that back seat. I walked toward my old car on trembling legs, knowing I had to make a decision that would change everything forever. I drove home in a state of complete shock with tears blurring my eyes and my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. I couldn't believe what I had heard. My own son, the reason for my existence, wanted to kill me for money. But to fully understand this betrayal, I need to tell you how we got here. Because my story with Javier began 35 years ago when he was born in the midst of absolute poverty. His father, Robert, died in a construction accident when Javier was just 8 years old. He left us with no insurance, no savings, nothing but a small, very old house we had bought with great sacrifice. Overnight, I became a single mother with a child to support and no formal education beyond high school. I started working cleaning houses at the age of 20. I woke up every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, made breakfast for Javier, took him to school, and then drove all over the city cleaning offices, houses, apartments, whatever was necessary to bring money home. My hands became rough from the cleaning chemicals. My back bent from carrying heavy buckets, but I never complained. Javier was a bright child, always the best in his class. His teachers constantly told me he had a brilliant future ahead of him, that I had to make sure he went to college. Those words became my life's mission. Every dollar I earned, I saved religiously for his education. When he turned 15, he needed a computer for his school projects. All the other mothers could easily buy them for their children. But for me, it would cost 3 months of work. I sold my wedding ring, the only valuable memento I had of Robert, to buy him that computer. Javier never knew the sacrifice I made, and I never told him because I didn't want him to feel guilty. During his senior year of high school, private universities started sending us information about their law programs. Javier had decided he wanted to be a lawyer, and I was willing to do anything to make that dream come true. The tuition was $20,000 a year, a fortune for a woman like me. I talked to my brother Alvin to ask for his help. He had a good job at an insurance company and lived comfortably with Patricia. I explained the situation to him. I begged him to lend me even a part of the money, promising to pay it back with interest. His response was cruel and direct. "Lydia, I can't risk my savings on your son's impossible dreams. He should get a job and forget about those fantasies of becoming a professional." Those words hurt me deeply, but they didn't stop me. I got a second job cleaning a veterinary clinic at night. I worked from 5 o'clock in the morning until 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. My body was exhausted, but my determination was unbreakable. I also started selling homemade food on weekends. I prepared tamale, empanadas, cakes, anything that could generate extra income. Javier helped me sometimes, but I preferred he focus on his studies. "Your job is to study, son. Leave the rest to me," I always told him. I finally managed to save the money for his first year of college. The day I accompanied him to enroll, I cried tears of happiness seeing his name on the official documents. My son was going to be a lawyer. All my sacrifice had been worth it. The college years were the hardest of my life. I worked up to 14 hours a day to keep the payments current. There were months when I barely had money to eat, but I always made sure Javier had everything he needed: books, supplies, money for social outings. I didn't want him to feel different from his classmates who came from wealthy families. During his junior year, Javier started dating Raquel, a classmate who came from a very well-off family. Her father owned several businesses, and she was used to a luxurious lifestyle I couldn't even imagine. At first, I worried that Javier would feel inferior, but he seemed to be in love and happy. Raquel was always cordial with me, but from the first moment, I felt a coldness in her demeanor. When she came to my house, she observed everything with a critical eye. The old furniture, the walls that needed painting, the small kitchen where I prepared simple meals. She never said anything directly, but her gestures spoke for themselves. After he graduated, Javier got a job at a prestigious law firm. His first paycheck was more than everything I earned in 3 months. I felt proud, but also relieved, thinking I could finally rest a little after so many years of intense work. He married Raquel in an elegant ceremony that cost me my last savings. She had insisted on a wedding appropriate for their social position, and even though the expense left me with no money, I wanted my son to be happy. During the reception, I heard some guests commenting about the groom's humble mother with a certain disdain, but I tried to ignore it. After the wedding, Javier's visits became less frequent. Raquel always had excuses: social commitments, work trips, family gatherings with her parents. When they did visit, the conversation centered on their new life, the luxurious apartment they had rented, the expensive restaurants where they dined, the plans to move to an even bigger house. I continued to work, but now only part-time. At 60 years old, my body could no longer handle the grueling hours of before. I had managed to save about $50,000 over the years, money I kept religiously for emergencies, or to help Javier if he ever needed it. My relationship with my brother Alvin also deteriorated over time. After Javier graduated and got a job, Alvin started making sarcastic comments about how some people are lucky with their successful children. Patricia was even worse, always implying that I had been selfish for investing so much in Javier's education instead of helping the extended family. What hurt me the most was seeing how Javier was starting to change. His values, his way of speaking, even the way he dressed became different. Sometimes when he talked to me, I detected a condescending tone that broke my heart. It was as if he was ashamed of his humble origins. 6 months ago, Javier and Raquel started talking about buying a house in an exclusive area of the city. The properties there cost more than $500,000, an amount that was incomprehensible to me. When I asked him how they planned to pay for it, he responded vaguely about investments and business opportunities. I also noticed that conversations about money became more frequent during their visits. Subtle questions about the value of my house, about my savings, about whether I had life insurance. At the time, I thought it was filial concern, that he wanted to make sure I was financially okay. Now, sitting in my kitchen after having heard that horrible conversation in the car, all the puzzle pieces began to fit together. The changes in his personality, the questions about money, Raquel's influence, the complicity of Alvin and Patricia. It had all been part of a macabre plan that had been brewing for months. My son, for whom I had sacrificed my entire life, wanted to kill me to inherit my assets and collect my life insurance. The irony was cruel. The money they wanted to murder me for had been earned for the sole purpose of giving him the best life possible. I couldn't sleep a single minute that night. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to process the enormity of what I had discovered. My mind wouldn't stop replaying every word of that diabolical conversation. Over and over again, I heard Raquel's cold voice talking about my death as if it were a business transaction, and my son's voice, my own son, agreeing to the details of my murder. At dawn, I got up with a determination I didn't know I had. If they wanted to play dirty, I could too. But first, I needed to fully understand what I had become to them. I decided to do something I had never done in my life: spy on my own family. Over the next few days, I began to observe Javier and Raquel's behavioral patterns. I parked discreetly near their apartment in the mornings, followed them from a distance when they went out, and paid attention to every detail of their conversations when they visited me. What I discovered horrified me even more. Their lifestyle was completely unsustainable with the income they had. Javier earned a good salary as a lawyer, about $6,000 a month, but Raquel had stopped working after the wedding, and their expenses were excessive. They ate at restaurants that cost more than $200 a dinner. Raquel bought thousands of designer handbags, and they had rented an apartment with a monthly rent of $3,000. I also found that they had accumulated enormous debts. I accidentally overheard a phone call where Javier was arguing with someone from the bank about late credit card payments. They owed more than $50,000 in loans and cards, and the interest was accumulating quickly. The financial pressure had driven them to desperation, and I represented their only way out. My house, which they had valued at $200,000, my life insurance policy of $100,000, and my savings of $50,000 totaled exactly the amount they needed to save their financial situation and buy their dream house. But the most devastating thing was discovering that my brother Alvin was not only involved, but he had been the one who had originally suggested the idea. One afternoon, while cleaning the office where Patricia worked, I overheard a phone conversation that took my breath away. Lydia has always been so selfish with her money, Patricia was saying to someone on the phone. Alvin is right. It's time for the family to get what they deserve. That stingy old woman is going to die sooner or later. Why wait? We need that money too. Alvin lost his job 3 months ago, and we haven't been able to pay the mortgage. I stood paralyzed behind her office door. My brother had lost his job and hadn't told me anything. Instead of asking me for help as family, he had decided it was better to kill me to get the money. That same night, I decided to confront Alvin directly. I went to his house without warning, something I never did, and knocked on the door with my heart pounding violently. When he opened it, his face showed surprise and a flicker of what looked like guilt. Lydia, what are you doing here so late? He asked without inviting me in. Alvin, I need to talk to you. Can I come in? I said, trying to keep my voice calm. We went into the living room where Patricia was watching television. She greeted me coldly, as she always had for the past few years. I sat on the sofa and decided to get straight to the point. Alvin, is it true that you lost your job? I asked, watching his reaction carefully. His face turned red, and Patricia immediately turned off the television. How did you find out? He asked defensively. It doesn't matter how I found out. What matters is that you're my brother, and you didn't tell me anything. Why didn't you ask me for help? Alvin and Patricia exchanged glances that confirmed my worst suspicions. There was a silent communication between them, as if they had rehearsed this conversation. Lydia, you've always had your own problems. We didn't want to bother you, Patricia replied with a false smile that didn't reach her eyes. Patricia, I'm his sister. If Alvin needed help, I would be willing to help him. I have some savings. At that moment, I saw something horrible in my brother's eyes. It wasn't gratitude or relief, but resentment. Some savings? He asked sarcastically. Lydia, we all know you have a lot more than just some savings. You've been hoarding money for years while the rest of the family struggled. His words hit me like slaps. Alvin, I earned that money by working 14 hours a day to give my son an education. I didn't hoard it. I sacrificed everything for him. Exactly, Patricia interrupted with venom in her voice. Everything for Javier. You never thought about helping your own brother. When he needed money for college, you told him no. But for your little prince, Javier, there was always money. The conversation was getting aggressive, and I could feel the hostility growing in the room. It was as if years of accumulated resentment were bubbling to the surface. You don't understand, I tried to explain. I wanted Javier to have opportunities we never had. I wanted to break the cycle of poverty in our family. And what about breaking the cycle of favoritism? Alvin shouted, standing up. What about thinking of your brother who also needs help? It's always been the same, Lydia. Since we were kids, you were Mom and Dad's favorite, and now you act as if you're better than us. These accusations were completely false, but I saw that they had built a narrative to justify their resentment. In their version of the story, I was the selfish, privileged sister, while they were the misunderstood victims. If you needed money so badly, why didn't you ask me directly? I insisted, even though I already knew the answer. Patricia laughed bitterly. So you could give us handouts like we were beggars? So you could make us feel inferior like you always have. I have never tried to make you feel inferior. Oh no, Alvin yelled. And what about when you bought a house and we were still renting? And when Javier graduated from college and our kids barely finished high school? And when you brag about your savings while we struggled to make ends meet? Every accusation was more unfair than the last. I had worked like a slave to get everything I had. I hadn't inherited anything. I hadn't been lucky. I had sweated blood for every dollar. But to them, my relative's success was a personal affront. Alvin, if you need money, I can lend you $10,000 right now. I offered desperately, trying to find a peaceful solution. $10,000? Patricia scoffed. Lydia, we know perfectly well how much money you have. The house is worth $200,000. You have $50,000 in savings, and your life insurance is for $100,000. And you offer us $10,000 like we're beggars. My blood ran cold when I heard those exact figures. They knew too much about my financial situation. Someone had been investigating my finances in great detail. How do you know so much about my money? I asked with a trembling voice. Alvin and Patricia fell silent, but their faces gave them away. They had said more than they should have. I got up from the sofa on shaky legs. I think I have my answer, I said, heading for the door. Lydia, wait! Alvin yelled behind me. But I was already leaving the house. That night, I confirmed what I already knew. My own family saw me as an obstacle between them and the money they believed they deserved. It wasn't just Javier and Raquel. It was an entire family conspiracy that had been growing silently for months. The following days were the darkest of my life. I found myself in a situation I never imagined, knowing that my own family planned to murder me, but unable to turn to anyone. Who do you tell that your son wants to kill you? Who would believe you? Besides, I had no concrete proof, just a conversation I had overheard hidden in a car. I decided I needed more evidence before taking any action. If I was going to fight them, I had to be completely prepared. I began to document everything: their behavioral patterns, their conversations, their visits, anything that could serve as evidence later. I also made a decision that terrified me, but I knew was necessary. I was going to let them believe their plan was working. If I acted suspiciously or confronted Javier directly, they could change their strategy and become even more dangerous. Instead, I decided to continue playing the role of the naive, trusting mother. 3 days after my confrontation with Alvin, Javier called me to invite me to dinner. His voice sounded especially affectionate on the phone, which gave me goosebumps knowing what he really thought of me. Mom, Raquel and I want to take you to that Italian restaurant you like so much, he said in a sweet tone. We haven't spent time together as a family in a while. The restaurant he mentioned was one we had only gone to once more than a year ago, and I hadn't liked it particularly, but I feigned excitement. How sweet, son. I love the idea. Perfect. We'll pick you up Friday at 7. And Mom, wear your favorite green dress. We want you to look nice. That specific reference to my clothing seemed strange to me, but I accepted without asking questions. After I hung up, I wondered why he would have mentioned that particular dress. It was one I had bought 2 years ago, one of the few expensive dresses I had allowed myself to buy in my entire life. Friday afternoon, I carefully got ready. I put on the green dress as he had asked, fixed my hair, and put on a little makeup. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I tried to ignore the voice in my head that told me this could be my last dinner. Javier and Raquel arrived punctually at 7 o'clock. Javier looked nervous, though he tried to hide it with forced smiles and superficial comments about the weather. Raquel, on the other hand, seemed completely calm, almost cheerful, which I found even more disturbing. On the way to the restaurant, the conversation was strangely formal. They talked about Javier's work, about some supposed vacation plans, about anything but us as a family. I responded automatically, but my mind was completely focused on observing every detail of their behavior. At the restaurant, Raquel insisted I order the most expensive dish on the menu. Lydia, we're paying for everything tonight. Order whatever you want without worrying about the price, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. During dinner, they began to ask seemingly casual questions about my health. How have you been feeling lately? Had you had dizziness, problems climbing stairs? Had you updated your health insurance recently? Recently? Mom, we're worried about you living alone in that big house, Javier said in a concerned tone. The stairs are steep. What if you were to fall? Oh, son, don't worry. I've lived in that house for 30 years. I know every step perfectly, I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. But Mom, Raquel insisted, accidents don't care how long we've lived in a place. Maybe you should consider moving to a single-story apartment, something safer for a woman your age. The way she said accident gave me goosebumps. It was as if she was testing the word, seeing how it sounded out loud. And Mom, Javier continued, have you thought about making a will? I know it's uncomfortable to talk about these things, but it's important to have everything in order. There it was. The real reason for this dinner. They wanted to make sure the will was updated before they killed me. Well, I do have a basic will that I made a few years ago. I partially lied. I'm leaving everything to you, of course. I saw Javier and Raquel exchange a quick look of satisfaction. It was a look that lasted barely a second, but it was enough to confirm all my suspicions. That's good, Mom. But maybe you should review it with a lawyer. The laws change, and we want to make sure your wishes are carried out exactly as you want, Javier said in a professional tone. In fact, Raquel added, Javier could help you with that. Since he's a lawyer, he could make sure everything is perfect. The irony was macabre. My son, who planned to kill me, wanted to be the one to draft the will that would benefit him after my death. After dinner, they insisted on driving me back home. During the ride, the conversation became even more sinister. They started talking about what would happen in different hypothetical situations. Mom, if something were to happen to you, Javier said in a seemingly worried voice, is there anything specific you would want us to do with your personal belongings? Why are you talking about such sad things? I asked, feigning annoyance. I plan to live for many more years. Of course, Mom, Raquel quickly said. We just want to be prepared just in case. It's the responsible thing to do. When we arrived at my house, something strange happened. Instead of saying goodbye at the door as they always did, they insisted on walking me inside. Let us help you with the stairs, Mom. It's dark and you could trip, Javier said, taking my arm. As we went up the stairs to my door, I felt their eyes evaluating each step, each handrail, every possible point where an accident could occur. It was as if they were doing a reconnaissance of the crime scene. Once inside, Raquel started walking through the house as if she were inspecting it. Lydia, you really should get better lighting on these stairs. They're very dangerous in the dark. And Mom, Javier added, this rug at the top of the stairs is a little loose. You could easily trip on it. Each comment was another deeper stab in my heart. Not only were they planning to kill me, but they were here in my own home calculating exactly how to do it. After they left, I stayed awake all night, trembling, not only with fear, but with a sadness so profound it physically hurt. My son had been in my house, had had dinner with me, had feigned concern for my well-being, all while planning my death. That night, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I couldn't just wait for them to execute their plan. I couldn't continue living with the constant terror of knowing that every day could be my last. I had to act, but in a way they would never expect. If they wanted me to have an accident, then that's exactly what they were going to get. But it would be an accident that I would completely control. I began to plan my own fake death. Planning my own death was the most surreal and terrifying experience of my life. For entire days, I stayed awake thinking about every detail, every possible failure, all the ways my plan could go wrong. But I knew it was the only way to expose my family and save my own life. First, I needed help. And there was only one person in the world I completely trusted. My neighbor Beatrice. She was 70 years old, had been a nurse her entire life, and we had been close friends for more than 20 years. If anyone could help me with this impossible plan, it was her. One morning, after making sure no one was watching me, I went to her house with my heart pounding violently. When she opened the door, she immediately noticed my agitated state. Lydia, what's wrong? You look terrible, she said, inviting me in. We sat in her kitchen where we had had coffee hundreds of times over the years. But this conversation would be different from all the others. Beatrice, what I'm about to tell you is going to sound crazy, but I need you to listen carefully. I began in a trembling voice. I told her everything, from the conversation I had overheard in the car to the sinister dinner, from the confrontation with my brother to the strange visits to my house. Beatrice listened to me in silence, but I saw her expression change from surprise to horror, and finally to indignation. My God, Lydia, this is monstrous, she said, finally taking my hands in hers. Beatrice, I need your help. I have a plan, but I can't do it alone. I explained my idea to her. I was going to fake my own death in a way so convincing that even the paramedics would believe I had died. Beatrice, with her medical experience, could help me simulate the vital signs of a deceased person for long enough for them to declare me dead and begin the procedures. Lydia, do you realize how dangerous this is? If something goes wrong, if I don't, I'm going to die for real. I interrupted her. They already have everything planned. It's only a matter of time. Beatrice closed her eyes, thinking intensely. We would need specific medications. We would have to calculate the exact doses, and the timing would have to be perfect. So, will you help me? She looked at me intently for several seconds that felt like hours. Yes, she finally said, but we're going to do it in the safest way possible. Over the next few days, Beatrice and I worked on the details of the plan. She had kept contacts at the hospital where she had worked for decades and was able to discreetly obtain the medications we needed. We also identified the emergency medical technician who would respond to the call, a young man named Ruben, who had just graduated and wouldn't have enough experience to detect a sophisticated simulation. The plan was complex but feasible. I would take a specific combination of medications that would reduce my vital signs to almost imperceptible levels. Beatrice would be present to find my body and call emergency services. When the paramedics arrived, she would help guide the evaluation in a way that would confirm my death without them investigating too deeply. After I was declared dead, my body would be taken to the hospital morgue where a friend of Beatrice, a pathologist named Dr. Jones, not my brother, had agreed to help us without asking questions. He would falsify the death certificate and allow me to resurrect in private once the effects of the medications wore off. Meanwhile, I would remain hidden in a secret room in Beatrice's basement, watching and recording everything my family did after my supposed death. The most difficult part of the plan was the legal and logistical aspect. We needed to ensure there wouldn't be an autopsy, which meant my death had to look natural and expected for a woman my age. Beatrice suggested faking a heart attack, something common and rarely investigated in older people with no history of previous problems. 2 weeks after we started planning, we decided we were ready. We chose a Sunday afternoon when we knew Javier and Raquel would be at her parents' house for their weekly family lunch. On Sunday morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm. After weeks of constant terror, I was finally going to take control of the situation. I dressed carefully in my favorite yellow dress, fixed my hair, and even put on a little makeup. If I was going to die, I wanted to look dignified. Beatrice arrived at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with a small medical bag. Are you sure about this, Lydia? She asked me one more time. Completely sure. I took the medications under her careful supervision. The taste was bitter and unpleasant, but I tried not to think about it. How long until it takes effect? I asked. Between 15 and 20 minutes. You'll feel drowsy first. Then your breathing will become shallow and your pulse will decrease dramatically. It will be like entering a very light coma. The next few minutes were the longest of my life. Beatrice monitored my vital signs constantly, noting every change in a notebook. Gradually, I began to feel as if I were floating, disconnected from my body. Lydia, can you hear me? Beatrice asked. I wanted to answer, but my voice wouldn't come out. I could hear her perfectly, but it was as if I were paralyzed. It was terrifying and fascinating at the same time. Perfect. Your vital signs are exactly where we need them to be. Now, I'm going to call 911. I heard her dial the phone and start to play the most important role of her life. Please hurry. I found my neighbor unconscious in her house. I think she's dead. She's not breathing. She doesn't have a pulse. Hurry. While we waited for the paramedics to arrive, Beatrice carefully positioned me on the floor of my living room, arranging my body in a natural position for someone who had collapsed from a heart attack. Everything is going to be all right, Lydia, she whispered in my ear. In a few hours, this will be over and we'll have all the evidence we need. I heard the sirens approaching, and my heart would have started pounding violently if I had had any control over it. This was the moment of truth. If something went wrong with Beatrice's acting, if the paramedics were more experienced than we expected, if there was some detail we had overlooked, the whole plan would fall apart. The paramedics entered my house with their medical equipment, and from my semi-conscious state, I could hear fragments of their evaluation. 62-year-old female unresponsive. I don't detect a pulse. Respiration is imperceptible. How long has she been like this? I found her a few minutes ago. Beatrice replied in a broken voice that sounded genuinely distressed. I came to visit, and the door was open. I found her like this on the floor. After several minutes of evaluation, I heard the words I had been waiting for and fearing at the same time. I'm sorry, Mom. Your friend has passed away. It was likely a heart attack. At this age, it happens very quickly. Officially, Lydia had died. Now began the most difficult part of the plan, observing how my family would react to the news of my death. I woke up in the basement of Beatrice's house, completely disoriented and with a mouth as dry as the desert. The effects of the medications were gradually wearing off, but my body felt heavy and strange. Beatrice was sitting beside me, monitoring my recovery with the same professional dedication she had shown throughout my death. How do you feel? She asked, helping me sit up slowly. Like I was actually dead. I replied in a hoarse voice. It worked. They officially declared me dead perfectly. The death certificate is already signed. Officially, Lydia Monroe died yesterday at 3:45 in the afternoon from a sudden heart attack. The reality of what we had done hit me head-on. I no longer legally existed. I was a ghost, free to observe how my family would react without them knowing I was watching. Did you call Javier? I asked, though the question physically hurt me. Yes, I called him last night after they took you to the hospital. His reaction was disturbing. Beatrice showed me the phone where she had recorded the conversation. With trembling hands, I replayed the audio. Javier, it's Beatrice, your mom's neighbor. I have some very sad news. Your mother. There was a silence that lasted several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice didn't sound surprised or devastated. It sounded relieved. Oh my God, what happened? He asked. But there was something forced about his tone of shock. It was a heart attack. I found her in her house. The paramedic said it was very quick, that she didn't suffer. I see. Thank you for calling me Beatrice. Raquel and I will go to the hospital immediately too, to take care of everything. Javier, I'm so sorry. I know how much you loved your mother. Yes, it's a terrible loss, but my mom had been having some health problems lately. I guess it was her time. That lie about my supposed health problems pierced me like a dagger. He was building a narrative to justify my death before anyone asked uncomfortable questions. After listening to the recording, I couldn't hold back the tears, the coldness in his voice, the ease with which he had accepted the news, the lie about my health. It all confirmed that they had really been planning my death. There's more, Beatrice said softly. I installed hidden cameras in your house before you died. I wanted to capture their reaction when they went to pick up your things. She showed me her laptop where she had access to the cameras in real time. On the screen, I could see my own living room, empty and silent. It was strange to see my house from this perspective, knowing it was no longer technically my home. When do you think they'll come? I asked. Probably today. People don't usually wait long to go through the belongings of the deceased, especially when money is involved. We didn't have to wait long. Around noon, we heard the sound of keys in the lock of my house. Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia entered together like a well-coordinated team. What I saw next tore my soul to shreds. There were no tears, no mourning, not even a respectful pause upon entering the house where I had lived for 30 years. They immediately began evaluating my belongings as if they were appraisers at an auction. Well, finally, Patricia said with obvious relief in her voice. I didn't think this day would ever come. Patricia, please, Javier said. But his tone was more of caution than genuine reproach. We just lost my mom. Oh, Javier, don't give me the sentimental stuff now. We all know this was necessary, Raquel said with a coldness that chilled my blood. Your mother lived her life. Now we can live ours. Alvin was already checking the kitchen cabinets, looking for important documents. Where do you think she kept the bank papers? We need to find the information for her savings accounts. Check the desk in her bedroom, Javier suggested. She was always very organized with those papers. I watched them scatter through my house like vultures, touching my belongings, evaluating their value, planning how they would divide my inheritance. It was like watching my life being torn apart by people who were supposed to love me. Raquel found my jewelry box and began to examine each piece. This gold chain might be worth something. And these earrings, even though they're old, might have some sentimental value for someone. Sentimental value isn't going to pay the mortgage, Patricia said sarcastically. You'd better focus on what's actually worth money. Javier found my financial documents in the desk drawer exactly where I had always kept them. Here they are. Savings account at Northwood Bank, $3,000. Checking account, $8,000. And here's the life insurance policy. How much is the insurance? Alvin asked eagerly. $100,000. Sole beneficiary, me. Perfect, Raquel said with satisfaction. With that, plus the savings, plus what we get from selling the house, we'll have enough to buy the new house and pay off all our debts. And we'll get our share, right? Patricia asked in a threatening tone. Of course, Javier replied quickly. As we agreed, a quarter for you. Listening to my family negotiate the division of my inheritance, while my body was still fresh in the morgue, was more painful than I had imagined. But the worst was yet to come. Alvin found a family photo on my nightstand, one of the few pictures where we all appeared together on a Christmas 5 years ago. Instead of showing any emotion upon seeing it, he threw it in the trash without ceremony. We don't need to keep these sentimental things, he said with disdain. Alvin's right, Raquel confirmed. We need to be practical. We're going to sell the house quickly, so we can't clutter ourselves with useless things. But it was Patricia who said the words that hurt me the most. Honestly, I'm surprised it took her so long to die. With how stubborn she was, I thought she'd live to be 90 just despite us. They all laughed. They laughed at me, at my death, at my supposed stubbornness for having lived so long. In that moment, any doubt I might have had about the justice of my plan completely disappeared. Javier took out his phone and started making calls. Morrison Real Estate Agency, this is Javier Ruiz. I need you to come appraise a house for a quick sale. Yes, it's urgent. The owner passed away yesterday. We want it on the market this week. They hadn't even planned a dignified funeral. When Raquel asked about the funeral arrangements, Javier replied, Simple cremación, no wake, no ceremony. It's cheaper and faster. And if people ask why there was no wake, Alvin asked, we'll tell them it was her last wish, that she wanted something simple and private. Javier replied without hesitation. They were stealing even my dignity in death. There would be no opportunity for my few friends to say goodbye. There would be no recognition of my life of sacrifices. There would be nothing but an anonymous quick cremation. They spent 3 hours in my house cataloging every valuable object, planning the sale, distributing my belongings as if they were spoils of war. When they finally left, my home had been completely violated. That night, as I watched the recordings over and over again, I made my final decision. It wasn't enough to expose their murder plot. I had to make them pay for every cruel word, for every moment of coldness, for every piece of my life they had destroyed with their greed. Beatrice, I said with determination, I need you to help me with the second part of the plan. What do you have in mind? She asked, although from her expression, I could see she already knew it would be something dramatic. I'm going to rise from the dead at the most humiliating possible moment for all of them. And when I do, I'm going to make sure the whole world knows exactly what kind of people they really are. My family believed they had won the lottery with my death. They had no idea that the real lottery was just beginning, and they had bet on the wrong number. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster that took me from the deepest anger to a steely determination I didn't know I possessed. From my hiding place in Beatrice's basement, I continued to watch my family's every move through the hidden cameras, documenting every cruel conversation, every heartless decision they made about my supposed inheritance. Beatrice had installed more discreet cameras in strategic places: Javier's office, Alvin's house, even in Raquel's car. Her experience as a nurse had taught her to be extremely meticulous, and that meticulousness had transferred perfectly to our spy operation. "Lydia, you need to see this," Beatrice told me on the morning of the third day, pointing to her laptop screen. "Javier is in his office talking to someone on the phone. In the recording, I could see my son sitting at his desk talking with a smile that made my stomach churn. Yes, Mr. Davis, I understand it's a fast process for life insurance when the death is due to natural causes." "Exactly. A heart attack." "No, there was no autopsy. The doctor said it was completely normal for a woman her age with her history of stress." "How long for the payout?" 1 week. "Perfect." What impacted me the most was his completely nonchalant tone. There was no trace of pain, not even the discomfort one would expect from someone who had just lost their mother. He sounded like a businessman closing a routine deal. After he hung up, he immediately dialed another number. "Raquel, it's me. Good news. The insurance will be processed this week. $100,000 clean. Yes, I already called the real estate agency. They're coming tomorrow to appraise the house." "What?" "No, I haven't had time to think about feelings. We have to be practical." That last phrase broke my heart. His mother had died just 3 days ago, and he didn't have time for feelings. But what truly prepared me for the final phase of my plan was a conversation we captured that same afternoon between Raquel and Patricia at a downtown cafe. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Raquel said, sipping her latte. "That we finally got rid of that burden. Javier always felt guilty for not visiting her more, for not giving her more money. Now he can live his life without that constant pressure." "Oh yes," Patricia replied enthusiastically. "And the best part is that no one will ever suspect a thing. It was Alvin's perfect plan. An old lady in her 60s dying of a heart attack. Who's going to question that?" "Exactly. And now we all win. You and Javier can buy your dream house. Alvin can pay off his debts, and I can finally stop pretending I liked that bitter old woman." Hearing Raquel call me a bitter old woman after years of me treating her like a daughter was the final straw. In that moment, any last shred of maternal or familial love that might have remained in my heart completely evaporated. Evaporated. "Beatrice," I said that night, "you have contacts in the media, don't you?" "A few." "Why?" "Because I want my resurrection to be public. I don't want them to find out in private and have time to make excuses or manipulate the situation. I want the whole world to see exactly who they are." Beatrice smiled for the first time since this nightmare had begun. "I have a friend who works at Channel 7 News, Maria Elena Vargas, the investigative reporter. She loves these kinds of stories." "Perfect. When can we meet with her?" The next day, Maria Elena came to Beatrice's house at night after making sure no one had followed her. She was a woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes, and that energy that characterizes good journalists. "Mrs. Monroe," she said after we explained the entire situation to her, "this is absolutely incredible. If you have the evidence you say you do, this could be the story of the year." We showed her the video and audio recordings we had compiled over the past few days. I watched her take notes furiously as she listened to my family's conversations, and her expression changed from professional skepticism to genuine outrage. "This is monstrous," she murmured after watching the recording where Patricia suggested they had been waiting for my death for years, and they planned to have a meeting to officially divide the inheritance. I added, "Yes," I replied. Javier once told me that when something happened to any family member, we would have a formal meeting to read the will and distribute the assets. He said it was the civilized thing to do. When do you think that meeting will be? She asked. Probably next Saturday. That's when the whole family is usually available. Maria Elena closed her notebook and looked me directly in the eyes. Mrs. Monroe, if we do this, there's no going back. Once it airs, your life and your family's lives will change forever. They already changed forever the day they decided to kill me for money. I replied without hesitation. Now, I want the whole world to know what kind of people they really are. Over the next few days, Maria Elena and her team prepared everything for what they called the most dramatic resurrection in the history of local television. They installed additional cameras in my house, coordinated with the police department to have officers ready to arrest my family for conspiracy, and even contacted a judge to be present during the revelation. The plan was simple but devastating. My family would gather at my house on Saturday afternoon for the official reading of the will. While they were discussing how to divide my inheritance, I would appear at the front door, accompanied by the television cameras, the police, and all the evidence of their conspiracy. On Friday night, Javier called all the family members to confirm the meeting. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Mom's house, he told each one. Bring ID because the lawyer will need to verify who the legal heirs are. That lie about the lawyer enraged me. There was no lawyer. They had just invented that excuse to make the meeting seem more official and legal. That night, I could barely sleep. But it wasn't due to nerves. It was due to anticipation. After days of pain, betrayal, and humiliation, I was finally going to get justice. But more than justice, I was going to get something even more satisfying. The complete truth exposed for the whole world to see. Saturday morning, I got ready carefully. I put on the red dress I had bought for Javier's wedding. I did my makeup as if it were a special occasion and fixed my hair impeccably. If I was going to rise from the dead, I wanted to look absolutely radiant. Are you ready for this? Beatrice asked me as she checked the recording equipment one last time. I've been ready since the moment I heard my son planning my death. I replied with a calm that surprised me. Today, they're going to find out that Lydia Monroe isn't so easy to kill. Maria Elena arrived with her camera crew at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The hidden cameras show they're already arriving at your house, she informed me. Your brother and sister-in-law just got here. Your son and daughter-in-law are parking now. I watched on the screens as my family entered my house for the last time as heirs. They didn't know that in an hour their lives would turn into a public nightmare from which they would never recover. Mrs. Monroe, Maria Elena said to me, seriously, in a few minutes, you're going to walk through that door and confront the people who plan to kill you. Is there anything specific you want to say to them? I smiled for the first time in weeks. Oh yes, I have a lot to say to them. At 3:15 in the afternoon, as I watched my family through the hidden cameras settling into my own living room to divide my inheritance, I felt a mix of nerves and determination that I had never experienced in my life. It was as if all the years of sacrifice, humiliation, and pain had concentrated into this definitive moment. On the screens, I could see Javier sitting in my favorite armchair, the same one where I used to read him stories when he was a boy. He had a folder with legal documents in his hands, and an expression of satisfaction that made my stomach churn. Raquel was beside him wearing a new dress that had probably cost more money than I spent on clothes in an entire year. Alvin and Patricia occupied the sofa, and I could see the greed in their eyes as they waited to hear the exact figures of my inheritance. Patricia had even brought a notebook where she was writing down numbers as if it were a business meeting. Well, Javier began in a solemn but fake tone, we are here to discuss the distribution of my mother's assets. As you all know, she named me the sole heir in her will, but as a family we have agreed to make a more equitable distribution. Raquel added with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, yes. Maria Elena touched my shoulder. It's the perfect time, Mrs. Monroe. They're talking about exactly what we expected. I took a deep breath and walked toward the door of my own house, accompanied by 2 camera operators, a sound technician, 2 police officers, and the most tenacious reporter. My heart was pounding so hard I thought the whole neighborhood could hear it. "Are you recording?" I asked the main camera operator. "Yes, ma'am. We're live." Those words gave me the final push of courage I needed. Thousands of people were about to witness the most poetic justice of their lives. I put my key in the lock and turned it slowly. The metallic sound echoed throughout the house, and I immediately heard the conversations in the living room stop. "Did you hear that?" Patricia's nervous voice asked. "It must be the wind," Alvin replied. But his voice sounded uneasy. I opened the door and walked directly into the living room where my family was sitting, discussing how to spend the money from my death. The television cameras followed me, capturing every second of what was about to become the most dramatic moment of their lives. When I appeared in the doorway of the living room, the silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. Raquel was the first to see me. Her face went completely pale, and she let out a scream that probably echoed throughout the neighborhood. "Oh my God, it can't be." Javier got up from the armchair so quickly that he knocked all the documents to the floor. His eyes were so wide I thought they were going to pop out of their sockets. "Mom, but you're dead." Patricia started crying hysterically, not with joy at seeing me alive, but clearly with terror. "It's a ghost. It's a ghost. Lydia died." We all saw the death certificate. Alvin remained completely still as if he had been turned to stone. His mouth was open but no sound came out. "Hello, my dear family," I said in the calmest voice I could produce. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Maria Elena entered behind me with her cameras. "Good afternoon. I'm Maria Elena Vargas from Channel 7 News, and we're broadcasting live what could be the most shocking story of the year." "What's going on here?" Javier yelled, finally regaining the ability to speak, though his voice sounded completely hysterical. "What's going on, my dear son?" I replied, walking slowly to the center of the room. "Is that I have returned from the dead to personally hear how you were planning to divide my inheritance." But the hospital, the death certificate, you were cremated," Raquel stammered, visibly trembling. "Ah, yes, the cremation." I smiled with satisfaction. "How interesting that you mentioned that, Raquel, especially considering that you decided on cremation without a wake, because it was cheaper and faster. Isn't that right?" The cameras perfectly captured the look of horror on her face when she realized I knew exactly what they had said. "Mrs. Monroe," Maria Elena intervened, "could you explain to our audience what led you to fake your own death?" I turned to the cameras, aware that thousands of people were watching this confrontation in real time. "I was led to fake my death by discovering that my own family had planned to murder me to collect my inheritance." "That's a lie," Javier yelled. But his voice sounded more desperate than outraged. "A lie?" I asked calmly. "Do you mean lies like this?" I took out my phone and played the recording of the conversation I had overheard in his car. His and Raquel's voices filled the room, discussing the details of my planned death. "Are you absolutely sure no one will suspect anything when it happens?" "The plan is perfect. My mother will have a very natural, very believable accident." As the recording continued, I saw my family's faces change from shock to pure terror. Raquel began to cry uncontrollably, but they weren't tears of remorse, but of panic as she realized they had been discovered. "That recording is fake," Patricia yelled desperately. "Someone fabricated it. Lydia is crazy." "Fake?" I asked and took out another phone. "And what about this other conversation, Patricia? The one you had with Raquel at the cafe yesterday where you said it was Alvin's perfect plan." I played the second recording where Patricia spoke openly about how they had been waiting for my death for years, and how no one would ever suspect a thing. Alvin finally spoke in a trembling voice. "Lydia, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We would never do something like that." "A misunderstanding?" I laughed bitterly. "Is it also a misunderstanding that you were all here in my house yesterday dividing my belongings like vultures? Is it a misunderstanding that Javier had already called the insurance company to collect my life insurance policy? Maria Elena turned the microphone directly to Javier. Mr. Ruiz, how do you explain these recordings where you are clearly heard planning your mother's death? Javier was sweating profusely and his hands were trembling. This is a conspiracy. Someone is trying to destroy our family. A conspiracy? I interjected. Like the conspiracy you foremade to kill me? Like the conspiracy where you agreed to give Alvin and Patricia a quarter of my inheritance in exchange for their complicity. At that moment, one of the police officers stepped forward. Javier Ruiz, Raquel Ali, Alvin Monroe, and Patricia Taylor. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder. No, Raquel screamed. This can't be happening. She's dead. We saw her die. You didn't see me die, I replied with satisfaction. You saw me act, and apparently I acted much better than you ever pretended to love me. As the officers began to handcuff my family, Maria Elena continued with the live interview. Mrs. Monroe, how does it feel to confront the people who plan to kill you? It feels like justice, I replied, looking directly at the cameras. For 35 years, I sacrificed everything for my son. I worked 14 hours a day, sold my jewelry, gave up my own life to give him the education and opportunities he needed. And this is how he repaid me, by planning my death for money. Javier, with his hands now cuffed, looked at me with a mixture of hatred and despair. Mom, please. This is a mistake. I love you. I've always loved you. You love me? I asked in a voice that was broken but strong. Do you love someone you plan to kill for $200,000? Do you love someone whose death you celebrate without even organizing a dignified funeral? That's not true. Silence. I yelled with a strength I didn't know I had. I'm not going to listen to any more lies from your mouth. I heard everything, Javier. I heard how you planned my accident. I heard how you laughed about my death. I heard how Patricia said she was surprised it had taken me so long to die. I heard how you divided my money before my body was even cold. The tears finally began to fall from my eyes. But they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation. Maria Elena, I said, turning to the reporter. I want the whole city to know that family isn't always the one you share blood with. Real family is the one that loves you unconditionally, that takes care of you when you're vulnerable, that mourns your death instead of celebrating your inheritance. As the officers led my son, my daughter-in-law, my brother, and my sister-in-law away, Javier yelled at me from the door. This isn't over, Mom. We'll fight this in court. No, Javier. I replied with a calm that surprised me. This ended the day you decided your mother was worth less than money. Now you're going to face the consequences of your actions. When the house finally fell silent, Maria Elena closed the live interview. This has been one of the most extraordinary stories I have covered in my 20 years of journalism. A mother who faked her death to expose the family that planned to kill her. From here, Maria Elena Vargas, Channel 7 News. I sank into my favorite armchair, the same one where Javier had been sitting planning my inheritance just an hour before. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly at peace. Beatrice came in and sat beside me. How do you feel? Like I've finally woken up from the worst nightmare of my life, I replied. And as if the real Lydia Monroe just returned from the dead. The months that followed my resurrection were like living in a completely new world. The story went viral within hours, and not just locally. Media outlets all over the country covered what journalists called the most perfect family revenge in modern history. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. TV producers wanted to make documentaries. Writers wanted the book rights. And even a Hollywood company contacted me to make a movie. But the most important thing for me was that finally, after decades of silent sacrifice, the whole world knew my story. Social media exploded with messages of support. Thousands of women shared their own stories of maternal sacrifice, of ungrateful families, of children who had abandoned them after receiving everything from them. I became, without wanting to, the voice of all the mothers who had given everything for their families only to be betrayed in the end. The legal process was faster than expected. The recordings that Beatrice and I had compiled were irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy. Javier, Raquel, Alvin, and Patricia were formally charged with conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and planning a homicide for financial gain. During the hearings, their lawyers tried to argue that the recordings had been obtained illegally. But the judge determined that since it was my own house and my own conversations that had been recorded, there was no violation of privacy. In addition, the fact that they had been planning my death justified any means necessary to protect my life. What hurt me the most during the trial was hearing Javier on the stand trying to justify his actions. His lawyer had built a defense based on the idea that I had been a controlling, manipulative mother who had emotionally blackmailed my son throughout his life. My client felt trapped by the constant demands of a mother who was never satisfied with anything. The lawyer argued Mrs. Monroe used her sacrifice as an emotional weapon against her son, making him feel guilty for wanting to have his own life. Hearing those lies in a courtroom broke my heart once again. They had turned my unconditional love and my sacrifices into something toxic and manipulative. In their narrative, I was the villain, and they were the victims of my supposed maternal tyranny. But when it was my turn to testify, I had the opportunity to tell my side of the story. In a firm but emotional voice, I narrated every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every extra job I had taken to give Javier the best life possible. I described how I had sold my wedding ring to buy him his first computer, how I had worked 14 hours a day to pay for his college, how I had given up my own happiness to ensure his. Your Honor, I said, looking directly at the judge, I never blackmailed my son with my sacrifice. On the contrary, I tried to hide it from him so he wouldn't feel guilty. I wanted him to be free to live his life, to be happy, to start his own family. The only thing I never imagined was that that freedom would mean planning my death. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when the prosecutor played the complete recordings of all the conversations we had captured. Hearing those cold voices again discussing my planned death, this time in a courtroom full of people, was devastating but also liberating. When they played the recording where Patricia said she was surprised it had taken me so long to die, I saw several members of the jury wipe tears from their eyes. When they played the part where Raquel referred to me as that burden they had finally gotten rid of, even the judge had to pause to compose himself. Javier broke down crying during that part of the trial, but I'm not sure if they were tears of genuine remorse or simply terror of the consequences he was facing. The verdicts came back after only 3 hours of jury deliberation. Guilty on all charges. Javier was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Raquel received 15 years, Alvin 12 years, and Patricia 10 years for being considered the least active in the planning, but an essential accomplice in the conspiracy. When the judge read the sentences, none of them looked at me. They kept their heads down, finally facing the reality that their actions had real and devastating consequences. After the trial, I approached Javier one last time before they took him away. My son, I said softly, I want you to know that despite everything you've done, there is still a part of me that remembers the sweet boy you used to be. He looked at me with eyes full of tears. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't know what I became. You became someone who valued money more than his mother's life, I replied sadly. But maybe these years in prison will give you time to remember who you were before greed consumed you. Those were the last words we exchanged. The following months were about a total reconstruction of my life. I sold the house where I had lived for 30 years. It had too many painful memories, and I couldn't continue living in the place where my family had planned my death. With the money from the sale, I bought a smaller but beautiful house in a quiet neighborhood near Beatrice's home. I also made a decision that completely changed my perspective on wealth and money. I donated most of my savings to a foundation that helps single mothers fund their children's college education. If my money had been what motivated my family to want to kill me, then I would use that same money to do good in the world. With the income from the rights to my story, I established a scholarship fund that bears my name. Every year, 5 working mothers receive full financial assistance to send their children to college. It's my way of making sure that my experience, however painful it may have been, can create something positive. But the most significant change in my life was the discovery of a new family. Through the letters and messages I received after my story went public, I met dozens of people who had gone through similar experiences. Mothers betrayed by ungrateful children, siblings abandoned by greedy relatives, elderly people exploited by their own kin. We formed a kind of chosen family, a support group that met regularly to share stories, celebrate achievements, and remind each other that true love exists even when it doesn't come from where we expect it. One of those people became especially important to me. Gabrielle, a 58-year-old woman whose daughter had abandoned her in a nursing home after taking all her savings. Gabrielle and I developed a friendship so deep that she became the sister I had always wanted to have. You know what the most ironic thing about all this is? Gabrielle said to me one afternoon as we had coffee in my new kitchen. Our biological families betrayed us for money, but we found much better families without money having anything to do with it. She was right. My new life was full of people who loved me for who I was, not for what I had. People who celebrated my achievements without calculating how they could benefit from them. People who, when my real natural death came many years from now, would mourn my passing instead of celebrating my inheritance. 2 years after my resurrection, I received a letter from prison. It was from Javier. In 4 handwritten pages, he apologized with words that sounded genuine for the first time in years. He told me about the therapy he was receiving in prison, about how he was finally understanding the magnitude of his betrayal, about how he spent his nights remembering all the sacrifices I had made for him. "Mom," he wrote on the last page, "I know I can never undo what I did. I know I deserve to be here, and I know you may never be able to forgive me, but I want you to know that every day I spend in this cell, I remember the incredible woman who raised me, and I hate myself for having been so blind to your love." I read that letter many times over several weeks, debating with myself whether to respond or not. I finally decided to write back, not to forgive him, but to close that chapter of my life definitively. "Javier," I wrote, "I accept your apology because I believe it's sincere, but forgiveness is something you'll have to earn over many years, possibly the rest of your life. The boy I raised is buried under the man who planned my death, and only you can decide if he's worth unearthing." I never received a response to that letter, and that's okay. Today, at 65 years old, I can honestly say I am happier than I have been in decades. My house is filled with the laughter of my chosen family. My days are busy with meaningful volunteer work. And my nights are filled with genuine peace. Sometimes people ask me if I regret faking my death. If it wouldn't have been better to confront my family in a less dramatic way. My answer is always the same. They chose to betray me in the most dramatic way possible, by planning my murder. I simply chose to defend myself using their own medicine. The most important lesson I learned from this whole experience is that true family is not defined by the blood we share, but by the love we choose to give each other. My biological son betrayed me for money, but I found sisters, daughters, and even grandchildren in the people who came into my life after my resurrection. I also learned that it's never too late to start over. At 62, when most people think their lives are already defined, I had the opportunity to be completely reborn. I didn't just fake my death. I faked my rebirth. And finally, I learned that justice sometimes comes in the most unexpected ways. It wasn't a judge or a jury who really punished my family for their betrayal. It was the truth publicly exposed that destroyed them. The money they were willing to kill me for became the cost of the lawyers who couldn't save them. Tonight, as I write these last lines of my story, I look out the window of my new house at a garden I planted with my own hands. The flowers I sowed are blooming beautifully, fed not by the bitterness of the past, but by the hope of the future. My name is Lydia Monroe. I'm 65 years old, and this is the story of how I died to truly live. If there is any mother reading this who feels betrayed by the family she sacrificed everything to create, I want you to know that it is never too late to find the love you truly deserve. Because in the end, true family is not the one that gives us life, but the one that makes it worth living. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.